Have you ever wanted a show to start off with an 11-year-old Christian boy drinking his own urine and impregnating a whole town, and ending with his father shooting him in a drunken stupor in the privacy of the woods? Have you ever craved a series that would make you understand and sympathize with the most unhinged, awful, despicable, and irredeemable characters in the history of television? Have you ever desperately looked for a program that would be cancelled early, after its best season, for being so dark even a platform like Adult Swim couldn't stand it? Well, if you have, Dina Stamatopoulos and Scott Adsit made Orel just for you. The show ran from 2005 to 2008, with its episode in the first season not even airing in order, but despite that, it's getting the recognition it deserves lately. And that makes me extremely happy and excited, since I personally believe it's one of the best adult animation series out there. So I want to take a moment to, as the title suggests, overanalyze part of the shows I found interesting and give my own personal thoughts on certain installments and choices made by the writers. This video is purely made of passion and admiration, and I hope I can get that out there. With that out of the way, let's take a quick second to talk about the premise and concept of the show. Orel is a satire of religious fanaticism and was culture, as it follows Orel, a child living in the fundamentalist Christian town of Moralton with his father Clay, his mother Roberta, and his little brother Shapey. Each week, Orel learns a lesson from Reverend Patty's sermons, follows it to a T, causes trouble, and then gets lectured and spanked by Clay in his study for all the wrong reasons. For example, in the very first episode, The Lord's Greatest Gift, Orel learns that dead people are sinners, as they rejected God's gift of life. And so, with the help of the Necronomicon he stole from his sister-in-law's library, he resurrects the dead. In this case, his father doesn't punish Orel because he'll literally unleash a zombie apocalypse, but rather because the living corpses are naked, which, in his and the town's opinion, is sinful and unholy.
Nudity is a horrible thing and should only be committed as a last resort. You know the 11th commandment, thou shalt be ashamed of thy natural anatomy.
Oh yeah, those lost commandments always throw me off.
The first 9 episodes of the first season all follow this exact formula, but the more we keep going, the more we notice something is not quite right. For example, in the third episode, Charity, we can see a glimpse of frustration in Clay and Roberta's marriage, as the latter gets annoyed at her husband for day drinking at church. Even though this moment is very brief, it's important to acknowledge, as it shows that there's some kind of tension between them. Right in the next episode, Waste, we instead see that Orel's track coach, Daniel Stopframe, is attracted to Clay, who seems to reciprocate his feelings. We can tell there are many things going on, but the characters are still intentionally underdeveloped at this point of the show, so these details perfectly disguise themselves as just throwaway lines and jokes that don't hold much meaning. We get introduced to other characters along the way, such as Stephanie, a woman who works at a sexy shop and is one of the few non-Christian characters in the show, which makes her not cast in Moralton, but that despite that, is also possibly the most level-headed and nice girl there, and Joe, Stopframe's nephew, who for now doesn't have much character aside from covering all of the 3 points in the McDonald triad. The true cracks in the quirky and edgy satire start actually being too visible to ignore in episode 9, which is also my personal favorite of the season, Maturity. In this episode, Orel wants to be, well, mature, so he observes the adults in Moralton in order to be like them, and boy, they are not good role models. After his exploration of the town, Orel goes home to Clay and Roberta fighting, and the things they say to each other catch you completely off guard.
That kid gets more action than I do.
I am still weaning him, Clay.
Roberta, he's 7. He should not be using your milk to wash down his meatloaf, which I pay for by working that stinking dead-end job.
I am so sick of your complaining. Why don't you just quit your job and quit being such a crybaby?
Oh, thanks for the sympathy. You have never been on my side.
Why would I be on the side of a self-destructive alcoholic?
I can't believe I gave you the privilege of satisfying me every night. Son of a...
It's as clear as day that the two have a very unhealthy and unfulfilling intimate life, and they use it as a means to manipulate each other, which, of course, their son doesn't realize. After seeing his father drink in his study, Orel is convinced that alcohol is the key to maturity, so he steals the liquor from his cabinet and he gets addicted to it, becoming somehow an even more miserable version of Clay, who, upon finding out his son has been drinking, as usual punishes Orel in his study, and possibly gives him the most harmful lesson in the show so far.
Oh, son. Behaving like a grown-up is many things. First and foremost, it means doing things that you hate doing.
Like what, Pop?
Well, like dealing with people who make you unhappy, being stressed about things you have no control over, and working soul-numbing jobs.
Oh.
Then, gradually, as we endure these hardships and accept them as normal, that's when we've finally earned the right to get drunk and be emotionally distant from our families.
Just like my father. I love you, Dad.
The inherent meaning of his lecture is that maturity is not about drinking, smoking, and paying taxes, it's all about pain. The more you endure the bad things in your life, the more adult you are, and it's when you accept your struggles as normal that you earn the right to drink. Not only is it horrible for a parent to tell his child that being an adult is just an endless spiral of misery and sacrifice, but it's also something that is, most of the time unintentionally, taught to kids on a daily basis, especially in religious settings.
I sacrificed the ultimate sacrifice, my happiness, for my kids. You bet I did.
You bet I did.
Let me explain. The concept of sacrificing your own happiness for the greater good has been glorified and almost fetishized to an extent in our everyday life. I went to Catholic school and I distinctly remember the nuns preaching to a bunch of 8-year-olds why it's good to put rocks in your shoes in order to pay for other people's sins, or giving us a checklist of things we love to cut off from our lives in order to be more mature and closer to God. And we're talking about Milan in 2017, not some kind of frozen in time fictional town in the Bible Belt. The concept of denying yourself happiness in order to be a good person, or at least appear as one, is a recurrent theme in the show, and it's particularly well executed here. The reason why I love it so much is because, unlike what Clay has taught Orel in his study before, his lesson here is realistic enough to hit hard, even though it's obviously exaggerated for the sake of dark humor. Maturity is great at setting up the tone of the next episode, and if you already thought it was getting pretty heavy, you're about to be hit directly in the face by what's to come.
If the Lord were alive today, what would you give him this Christmas? What do you give
Someone who has everything and more.
The Best Christmas Ever was aired as the first episode on Adult Swim, which was probably the worst decision ever made in the history of decisions. Moral Orel had a clear way it needed its story to be told. They wanted to subvert all expectation and stereotypes and turn this sitcom-like show into a dark drama. And The Best Christmas Ever was supposed to be that turning point, but since it was aired out of order, the whole concept was completely ruined, unfortunately, and many people didn't give the show a second chance. Which pains me so much to say because, boy, this episode is stellar. As usual, we start off with one of Reverend Putty's sermons, where he talks about how Joseph still accepted Jesus even though he wasn't his biological son, and then proceeds to talk about how the second coming of the Lord might already be among us. The sermon causes Clay and Roberta to break into another fight. This time, though, it's about Shapey, their youngest son, as Clay believes he's not his actual father, which, as we'll see later, is true, but in the weirdest way possible. Their argument, unlike the one in the previous episode, feels so much more real here, and definitely much more unnerving. There's no background music, no jokes, no light-hearted lines, just them being stone cold and cruel to each other in a way we've never seen before. It's jarring, scary even, and it all culminates with these lines of dialogue.
He doesn't even look anything like me. Who's been inside you?
You are disgusting. I want a divorce.
Fine, I'm gone. Live it up, baby!
Despite his family quite literally being torn apart right before his eyes, Orel, as innocent and optimistic as he is, actually believes that Shapey is the second coming of Jesus, and so he takes him around town to do his bidding. There's this juxtaposition between Orel's childlike view of the world and these silent shots of Roberta just sitting in bed, completely silent, with the most empty and defeated expression on her face, and it's all played completely straight. After Orel and Shapey tear up a nativity scene, Reverend Putty calls Roberta and she goes to pick up the kids, and she explains Clay's absence to her son in the most gut-wrenching way possible.
Mom, guess what? Dad isn't Shapey's father.
I know that, Orel.
Then you figured it out. Are Shapies the second son of God?
I wish God was his father.
Where's Dad?
He left home. We're splitting up.
But it's Christmas. We can't spend it without him.
Then I suggest you go find your precious father and the two of you spend Christmas together.
So, after being left alone on Christmas night, Orel goes to the one place he knows he'd find his father at, the bar, where he's drinking with Coach Stopframe. Orel doesn't go up to him. He just prays to God, hoping he'll fix things, hoping for a response, hoping it to be the best Christmas ever, but deep down, we know he's never going to get it, so we're just left with silence and an overwhelming sadness by the end of the episode. This is the only installment in Season 1 that doesn't end with Orel getting a beating and lecture in his father's study, and that's very important, because it truly means that there has been some significant change in the show. It subverts our expectations, and we are hit with the realization that the behaviors of the characters will never feel the same again, because now we know what's going on beneath the surface. We know that nothing is as funny as it seemed like in the first episodes, and just like Orel, we lose a bit of our innocence, of our hope, and it's only gonna get ripped away the more we continue watching.
I was just trying to be good, so you could love me more than you do now.
Oh, Orel, I could never love you more. People only have a certain amount of love in them, and I'm afraid I have to divide mine up between at least a dozen people.
Oh.
But remember, son, I love you enough.
All around, Season 1 is definitely the weakest season in moral Orel, but it's also necessary to see it all in order to understand the characters and the world around them. I personally find the comedy in the show as endearing as its darkest moments, and Season 2 has the perfect balance of both. So let's jump right in. So now, Orel's parents have divorced, and no, actually, they aren't.
I know things have been a little rough over the past few months, what with your mother's unreasonable behavior and her coldness towards me. No, don't say anything. You and Shapey are still young, needy, impressionable children. So your mother and I have decided to stay together. If only for appearances. The last thing we want people to think is that we don't care about our own kids. That's one fact that is none of their business.
I prayed that you'd get back together.
Well, I think you can give me credit for this
We are
one.
back to the status quo and formula of the first season, but something again is not quite right. While we saw in the best Christmas ever, completely shifted our outlook on the town and characters, especially the Poppington family. Claire and Roberta choose to get back together, but despite that, we can easily tell nothing has been resolved, and the hatred they feel towards each other is still very much tangible. This season is double the length of the first one, so while some episodes are fairly skippable, there are some amazing moments sprinkled throughout, and we already start to see that in the second installment.
Look what I found!
Orel, you know that living animals aren't allowed near the delicious ones.
I want to keep him as a pet.
Nonsense. You already have Shapey.
Cake! But I want something that's cute and that loves me and that licks my face. Yummy! Can I keep him, Mom? Please?
Oh, all right. But only if it'll stop you from asking me questions.
Gee, thanks!
Now spray your hands. We're eating soon.
In Love, Orel finds a dog and chooses to keep him, naming him Bartholomew. Here the joke is that the puppy is very obviously the second coming of Jesus, which is something that Orel is oblivious to, even though it's pretty on the nose.
First things first, you need a name. What do you think we should call you? That's it! Bartholomew! One of our Lord's lesser-known yet very important disciples.
The main conflict here is that in Reverend Patty's sermon he states that loving anything more than Jesus is a sin, and when Orel finds out, with his best friend Dowie, that he does care about Bartholomew more than the Lord, he falls into a crisis. In the meanwhile, the adults of Morrilton are growing frustrated with the dog as it's spreading too much love and outshining them, another direct parallel to the story of Christ.
I'm gonna have to give Bartholomew up.
Good. Hand him over to Dr. Potter's wheel. He has a shot for him that will be virtually painless. Right, Doc?
Well, I'm no vet, but then again, I'm only gonna kill it.
Gee, Dad, does he have to die?
With all that love being spread everywhere, this dog is dangerous.
In the end, Orel is forced to put Bartholomew down, which is not only extremely dark, but also kind of ironic. as it shows that if Jesus were alive today, he'd definitely get shut down once again for spreading his ideals and believing in equality and love for everyone, especially in a town like Moralton. The whole episode is an analogy to the Passion of Christ, where each character plays their assigned role. This is the first of many times in the show where Orel is forced to make a choice, one that will make him happy, which is usually the most reasonable one, and one that will please his parents and the town, which is often, ironically, the most immoral. This episode also ends on an extremely sad note, as just when Orel has accepted Bartholomew's death and is content with the idea that he's going to meet him in heaven, Wilberta completely shatters his heart by stating that animals don't have a soul, thus they don't go to heaven.
Oh, Orel, animals aren't allowed in heaven.
They aren't?
Of course not.
Does that mean Bartholomew is going to burn in hell?
Not that either. You see, animals have no souls whatsoever. That's what makes it so tasty when we eat and drink them.
Well, why didn't God give him a soul?
Because that would go against the Bible, and not even God can do that.
But
Rules are rules.
Orel is visibly sad, but the show doesn't give him a chance to express how he feels before the episode finishes, adding on a fake happy tone that's only there to hide the underlying horror of the words spoken by these characters. Speaking of horror, the episode Satan actually gives a lot of focus to Coach Stopframe and his relationship with Clay. He's one of the more interesting characters in the show, in my opinion, as he's sort of isolated from the rest of the town. He oscillates between Satanism and Christianity based on what will get him closer to Clay, and one day he decides to attend one of Reverend Patty's sermons. However, as soon as the latter sees Danielle's outfit, the topic of the sermon changes to something much more fitting.
Homosexuality.
As soon as he realizes Christianity probably won't benefit him, Stopframe immediately turns back to Satanism, this time bringing Orel to a bunch of cultists as a virgin to sacrifice in order to win Clay's love. Luckily, the Satanists are just a bunch of edgelords and future fortune users, so nothing happens to the boy and Danielle remains conflicted on his faith. His relationship with Clay is weird, to say the least. They meet formally for the first time in the first episode of the first season, yet it's clear that Stopframe has been infatuated with him way before that. In the special Before Orel, released in 2012 after the cancellation of the show, we get the confirmation that Shapey's father is in fact Danielle, who had sex with Wilberta in order to get closer to Clay. Ignoring the plan's faulty logic, the problem here lies within the fact that they don't even know each other. Coach Stopframe has no indication whatsoever that Clay isn't straight or into him at all, still he was willing to just wreck a whole family because he wanted to be in a relationship with a stranger, regardless of the consequences. Danielle is a very nihilistic person. He doesn't care about anyone but himself, and so is Clay. But the difference is that the latter does worry, however, about his image, while Stopframe doesn't, and is happy with living in the shadows as long as he gets to do what he wants when he wants. Their relationship cannot work out because Clay will never give up on the life he built for himself. He doesn't keep Wilberta, Orel, and Shapey around because he cares about them, but rather because he wants what others can have. He wants people to envy him at the cost of his own happiness. These two characters do feel a genuine connection with each other, but they're too damaged as people to actually pursue a healthy relationship. It's not love, it's obsession on one side and lack of commitment on the other. And above that, Clay is not refraining from being with Danielle because he's married. Throughout the show, he's not only implied to have caught an STD from the sex workers Orel brought to town in the episode Presents from God, but he actually later ggets seduced by Miss Censordoll in the Season 3 installment Nesting. Not to mention that in the 4th episode of the season, Elemental Orel, we find out that Clay and Wilberta are swingers, which is fun in itself, but all of this is to say that he really doesn't care about cheating or the Christian values of marriage. What makes a difference for him is that Danielle is a man, and that will go against everything he believed in throughout his life. And he's never going to change his ways because admitting to being in the wrong and bettering oneself is useless to him. It's a sign of weakness. And that's why their relationship was never able to develop, because they aren't willing to change, not even for each other.
You're better when you drink.
Oh, Danielle, I miss your little face.
Speaking of change, and positive one at that, Stephanie and Orel actually became good friends. And one day, after his guidance, she decides to go to church and attend one of Reverend Patty's sermons, who, being the sexually frustrated man he is, immediately flirts with her, before she reveals that she's actually his biological daughter. Initially, he's not too happy about the news. Not because he tried to seduce her moments ago, not because he didn't get the chance to raise her, but because he didn't even get to procreate in order to conceive her. If you're wondering how that's even possible, well...
Turns out she started spying on you for weeks before she even made her move. She had your whole routine down.
This is a nightmare.
One night, she waited till you were finished. Apparently, you pass out pretty hard and quick, big guy.
Please get to the end of the story.
Then she crawled through the window, swiped it, and left.
Even though that's probably the holiest way to be fruitful and multiply, as the title of the episode indicates, the Reverend is still not too pleased about it, and at first he keeps Stephanie away. It's only after a conversation with Orel that he builds up the strength to go to her shop, finally accepting his position as her father.
You know what? Let's just cut the Reverend stuff, huh?
Okay, what would you prefer? Pastor? Minister? Brother? Rod?
How about father?
Sounds a little too Catholic, doesn't it?
You're right. Better make it Dad.
Like many residents of Morrilton, Reverend Paddy is a selfish and fairly miserable man. But what makes him different from the other individuals in the town, such as Clay, is that he does try his best and he is willing to change, even though he makes a lot of mistakes along the way. And that gives him the heart so many of the characters lack. I wish we saw more of Stephanie's point of view, but honestly, seeing the Reverend show more of his vulnerable side was enough to make this one of my favorite episodes in the whole series. Seeing a healthy relationship in the show is as rare as finding a mentally well moral Orel fan, so it is very much appreciated. But it's not the only one this season.
Oh, Orel. Oh, tiny little female Christ.
In the episode The Lord's Prayer, a new family goes to live next to the Puppingtons, the Posabiles. And if you thought that their names were similar, wait until we actually meet them. They look the same as them, they have the same interests. The only real difference, aside from Block being a redhead, implying there's a ginger Danielle, is that the Posabiles have a daughter, Christina. The two families get along greatly, but what drives them apart is that they believe in a slightly different faith than the Pumpingtons, with reciting the debtor's version of the Lord's Prayer instead of the trespasser's one.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we
forgive our
Trespassers? Debtors? Trespassers? What are you, nuts? Get out!
Well, you think you know someone.
Clay and Roberta, and I guess Art and Bobbit, demand that Orel and Christina never speak to each other again. But for the first time in their lives, they consciously go up against their parents and meet up in secret. Orel actually uses the debtor's version of the Lord's Prayer too. Even though this immediately overwhelms me with guilt and he leaves Christina, it's still a very big moment in the show. Orel has never actively disobeyed his parents up to now, and that can be seen as character development. He's questioning the lessons he gets fed with, and he's slowly growing. In the end of the episode, the Posabiles move away, mistakenly switching Block and Shapey, and once again, Orel is stripped of an important relationship, like the one with Bartholomew. He has to give up on a lot this season, and the best example of this concept is the episode Pleasure.
Thank you, and may God bless you.
Oh!
Much like maturity, this installment is about how, in order to be sin-free, you have to deprive yourself of anything that gives you pleasure. And for Orel, that includes helping people, being nice to others, and of course, worshipping God. After supposedly doing the Lord's bidding by being an absolute dick, Orel has an interesting dream.
Uh-oh.
He, of course, goes to talk to Reverend Paddy about it the day after, who recommends he counters his pleasure with pain. But that just ends up with him joining a fetishist group, which is apparently completely fine with children being there, and has yet another even more interesting dream.
Take that, and that, and that, and that.
Hallelujah! Oh, brother.
His father, of course, doesn't punish him physically about it, but he does give him, yet again, a lesson very similar to the one in maturity, explaining how it's particularly easy when you're an adult, to live a pleasure-free life. This installment is extremely interesting as it does something I don't think anyone has mentioned yet. It draws a big parallel, in Orel's mind, between Clay and God himself. Not only are both voiced by Scott Adsit in Orel's interesting dream, but they're also the most important parts of his life. Orel takes Clay's words as gospel just like he does with God. That's why it's even more painful when that trust gets taken advantage of. Orel is not dumb, he does know right from wrong, and he does understand that his parents and the rest of the adults in Morrilton are extremely flawed people, even though he's constantly taught not to question authority.
I think you know who makes the rules for such a thing as praying.
Oh, of course.
That's right, a bunch of random guys.
In the episode Praying, everyone in town is counting on him to win a praying competition, but he's too stressed to. The highlight of the episode is that Orel wins thanks to meditation after Stephanie introduces him to it. But what I really want to focus on is the moment before he actually does meditate. While in the praying bee, he can bring himself to focus, and we get to witness the actual effects of the trauma he experienced throughout the series.
I never asked for a second child, and then boom, Shapey magically appeared.
But then again, I'm only gonna kill it.
You're not.
Oh, it's no use. I've gotta relax.
Self-destructive alcoholic.
Road dogma, a bone, bone, bone.
Father, and the two of you spend Christmas together.
This moment serves to show how, despite keeping a positive attitude, Orel knows what's going on in his life. He's aware that his parents aren't in love, that there's so much cruelty around him. We got drawbacks to the maturity, the best Christmas ever, the conception of Shapey, the fights, everything, and it's an extremely eye-opening moment for the viewer. The season is fantastic at being a follow-up to the first finale, and setting up the tone for the Nature two-parter. Some episodes were still very much lighthearted and fun to sit through, and some others left me a bit confused and bored, but at its core it really does outshine the first one, even though I still consider it to be beautiful in and of itself. Unfortunately though, the word beautiful is not going to pop out much from here on out, as what we're about to get through is absolutely chilling. This is where moral Orel takes a left turn. If you thought the best Christmas ever was depressing enough, then prepare yourself for this finale. Okay, so I'm just gonna put this plainly here. The Nature two-parter is one of the best pieces of television I have ever consumed in my entire life. And I don't have a lot of life experience. However, it is enough to kinda see good writing where I can see it. And I definitely see it here. And most of all, I see passion and dedication, which is really important to me. With that said, take this as a content warning, because it is also very, very, very hard to sit through. There are graphic depictions of abuse, and I feel like it's a sensitive subject for most, especially since it's inflicted upon a child. So make with that what you will. Don't torture yourself. Don't put yourself through things that will most likely put you in distress. I feel like these two episodes are fantastic, are awesome, but I can also see how they can be really, really heavy for a lot of people, really hard to stomach, and that's completely fine. With that said, let's get into it. The two-parter kicks off right after a lecture in the study, even though, for now, we don't know what Orel's done. For the first time in the whole show, though, Clay actively seeks out some bonding time with his son, by deciding to take him on a hunting trip, which has been a grand Puppington tradition for generations.
Why, old Gunny here used to be my father's, and then mine.
For years, it's been a grand Puppington tradition that the head of the household would hand off old Gunny to his firstborn son.
Here, why don't you try this one instead?
We immediately know something is gonna go down when Clay throws away Orel's first aid kit, in one of his fits of toxic masculinity. The two leave, and the atmosphere is somber. We can tell something awful is about to happen, but we really can't sense why. Just as they arrive at the Morrilton Nature Reserve, Clay starts drinking, and by the time they go hunting, he's already pretty frustrated, which triggers him even more when Orel refuses to shoot at the animals.
Got her! Ha-ha! I win!
and you lose.
We see Clay get increasingly angry at his son in a way we've never seen before. He ends up killing someone's hunting dog, which would be disgusting in itself, but considering what happened to Bartholomew, it's even more heartbreaking from Orel's point of view. After running away from the rightfully distraught owner of the dog, the two sit at a fire as the sun slowly begins to set and Orel starts to get hungry. It's here where we find out that Clay, amongst everything else, didn't bring any food on the trip. So he eats this pit-roasted dog, and it's really disgusting. It's also worth mentioning that there's no music whatsoever throughout the episode. The only background sounds we hear are the ones of the forest around them, which not only makes things much more tense, but it's also a great way to imply that Orel is losing the childlike innocence that he somehow managed to keep throughout the show. The score for the first 2 seasons is used to make the scenes feel more lighthearted, even when they're really not. A good example of this would be Maturity, where despite the fight between Clay and Roberta being harsh and ugly, the score manages to make it seem comedic. So, we're back to Orel and his father in the woods, and despite the boy not having any source of nutrition, he'd rather starve than hunt with this completely shit-faced excuse of a parent. Orel doesn't trust him with a gun in hand, but, of course, the former doesn't listen to his son. The more Clay gets angry, the darker the sky gets, and the man is now completely surrounded by green flies, a direct parallel to the bluebird seen in the opening sequences of every episode, and particularly present here, which is meant to represent Orel's innocence. There's nobody to defend him there, and is forced to watch Clay's demons unfold right before his eyes.
God.
What's the matter?
I hate myself. Why do you quit working on me? She always fools me, Orel. I'll make things better, dear. Drink me. Put me inside you. I'm great.
And she chokes me just like every other whore out there.
They're all worthless, kid. Every woman. Don't let them get you. All of them want to get you. They just grab you and pull you into them. And then you're forced to stay in and pull out, stay in, pull out, and then they cut you.
This scene is not only extremely emotionally impactful, but it's also something we, as the audience, have again never witnessed before. Clay has always been calm and collected with Orel, but now, where nobody can see and nobody can stop him, he lets his true self come out. And his true self is a hateful, repressed man that's extremely dangerous to be around. In his rant, he very clearly draws a parallel between alcohol and his wife, who he feels both destroyed his life, again unable to take accountability for his actions and the life he chose. And his rant completely escalates until I get this moment. And that ends the first part of Nature. Very few words can describe how I feel about it. It's just really hard to watch. We sympathize with Orel so much throughout the show, and it's sad to think that he was so excited about his dad wanting to spend time with him, as it's such a rare occurrence. Moral, Orel is a tale of disillusion. The idea of Clay being God in his son's eyes takes on a whole new meaning, as we can now see it as a loss of faith, of trust, of religion. Orel lost his main source of guidance and comfort in the worst way possible, and you just wait until we get to part 2. The previous episode ended on a cliffhanger. By this point, I was hoping Orel shot Clay, but perhaps what he did was even worse. He shot his father's last bottles of liquor, and he's enraged. Clay's anger escalates even further. He tries to beat Orel, but he instead falls to the ground in an attempt to take his belt off, in this dragged-out scene which makes him look even more pathetic and sad. But unfortunately, he does manage to get up, and he picks up his rifle. He goes on another rant about mistakes, which ties back into his inability to take responsibility for his actions and make amends. And then, the thing we all anticipated, but deep down hoped wouldn't occur, takes place.
Dad, watch out!
Please, Orel, I know exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, but you might shoot it off by mistake.
There aren't any mistakes either. No mistakes, no accidents, no flub-ups, no boners.
But
don't butt me!
Dad.
Orel, what have you done?
Yes, Clay actually shoots his son and blames it for it. Luckily, Orel brought his first aid kit, despite his father throwing it away earlier.
Okay, this might sting a little.
Whoops.
I hate you.
Hate away, sister. Hate away.
This line, spoken by Orel, it feels so natural. We've never seen him so cold, so angry before. He lost all respect for his father, and so did we. After drinking the whole bottle of rubbing alcohol, Clay literally falls to the ground to let his son bleed out. While Orel's laying on the ground, a bear shows up, and the boy shoots it in self-defense. His father finally wakes up well into the afternoon of the next day, and when he sees the bear, we get an extremely meaningful moment.
Well, we should get you.
Orel!
He's dead.
Shot?
Yeah.
Oh, Orel. Make me happy. Make me proud of you, son, and tell me that you shot that bear yourself.
No, Dad. You killed it.
Orel, throughout the show, has always looked for his father's approval in some way. He constantly asked for guidance. He trusted him, but not now. Now, he realized that the only way to have Clay's validation is to, well, be a shitty person. And Orel is way too pure, too kind, too different from his father to ever win his love. What hurts even more is Clay's attitude after the shooting. As always, he's unwilling to take responsibility for his actions, and he's back to the calm yet distant demeanor he had with Orel before this point. They get him discreetly stitched up and bandaged by Dr. Potterswheel, and after finally getting home, Orel has a conversation with Roberta.
Why did you marry Dad?
Why? Well, men have to marry women. Otherwise, if men married men and women married women, we'd all give birth to nothing but fairy sexuals.
But why did you marry Dad?
Oh, well. Why not?
Well, it's just that when he drinks, he changes.
Oh, he doesn't change, Orel. That's just his true nature coming out.
Nature.
Last shot of this extremely distressing finale is the blue bird, the symbol of Orel's innocence, sitting outside his window as it gets surrounded by the green flies. There is a lot of symbolism with animals in the show. The blue bird, as I said before, is a metaphor for Orel's innocence. The flies represent Clay's hatred towards the world, but there is something I haven't touched on yet. Dogs. Dogs are usually perceived as a symbol of loyalty and obedience, and it's also true for much of the show. Bartholomew and the idea of dogma in the episode Praying would be good examples. But in the Bible, the word dog originally used to take on a whole new meaning. The term was used to describe the ones who were banished from heaven. They were sinners. The animal was initially perceived as dirty and disgusting, and it changed its meaning and his relation to God only as time went on. And we do see that symbolism in the show too. In an episode I haven't mentioned up to now, Orel's movie premiere, Orel shows his family and friends the stop-motion animation we've seen him work on in the credits of each episode, which narrates, from his point of view, the first 3 installments of the show. Orel chose to represent Clay as a puppy, as he is, loyal and good, but instead, he ends up making him look like a monster. Clay lets Bartholomew be put down by Dr. Potterswheel. Clay kills the hunting dog and eats it, and to me, that's a way to portray how he took advantage of his son's loyalty and completely destroyed it. Nature is usually regarded as something beautiful, positive, something untainted by human touch. But not Clay's nature. His idea of nature is brutal, it's unforgiving, time back to his idea of adulthood and, well, life in general. Clay's misery has been mostly played off as a joke in the earlier episodes, like maturity or pleasure, but now that Orel's perception of him shifted, we finally get to see how it really is. A deeply unsatisfied man taking out his anger on the world, actively looking forward to corrupt his son, destructing himself and anything that's on his way. Since Orel's now been completely stripped of his innocence, Season 3 is mostly composed of flashbacks, as in order to keep playing into the story, Orel still has to be untainted in some way. And not only Orel, but the rest of the town as well. The show in Season 4 was supposed to change its name to Moralton. It was supposed to be a whole insight on the town itself, and then the show got cancelled, and the episodes in Season 3 were cut to only 13. Why? Well, to understand that, we need to go by all the episodes in the third season, as there's not one of them I could consider worth skipping at all. So let's get this started with the first installment, Numb.
Describe your pain. Please. Please.
This episode revolves around the hunting trip, like most of the season. But this time, it's from Roberta's point of view. We start off with the track No Children by the Mountain Goats, instead of the theme song, which already marks a big tonal shift. And I just want to take a moment to appreciate how amazing this choice was. John Darnielle, the singer, guitarist, and keyboardist of the Mountain Goats, created the alpha couple, two characters in an extremely toxic relationship, bound only by hatred, addiction, and self-destructiveness. The song has very strong lyrics, such as, I hope I cut myself shaving tomorrow. I hope it bleeds all day long. Our friends say it's darkest before the sun rises, well, we're pretty sure they're all wrong. And the chorus literally outright saying, I hope you die, I hope we both die. It's called No Children as, Darnielle explained, the best outcome of their relationship is if they never procreate. This, with Clay and Roberta, however, is not the case, as they do have kids, and they do have the responsibility to keep them safe, at which they depressingly fail at. We got a shot of the couple in bed, separated by the Lust Guard 6000, and before the hunting trip, this is the only thing Clay says to his wife.
See you in 2 days.
We almost never saw Roberta alone. She's always kind of been an extension of Clay, Orel, and Shapey, and even then, she's rarely acknowledged, and she knows it. This episode is all about her looking for a connection, wanting to be wanted. She goes to Coach Stopframe, the father of Shapey, but he of course isn't interested in her, as it was all just a ploy to get closer to Clay in the first place.
I'm sorry. Oh wait, no I'm not. I don't care. Wow, what a freeing thought.
What an absolute dick. She goes to Reverend Putty, who gets a little bit too prematurely excited to see her. So she's alone again, and she masturbates with a little jackhammer in order to feel something. This of course brings her a lot of physical damage, so she's forced to go to the hospital, where we learn that Dr. Potter's wheel has a thing for gore and mutilation, which of course is a massive problem as he's supposed to cure said wounds. He just prescribes her with painkillers and actively encourages her to hurt herself again, which she does. She goes back to him and it's clear that her situation is severe, but the doctor only gets more excited, and like before he does nothing to help her. This time though, at home, Roberta is finally able to feel pleasure without the jackhammer. Just thinking about the doctor is what cured her. And when she goes to the hospital the next day, without being completely mangled from the waist down, the man isn't very happy.
Oh, well then you can go.
Go?
Yeah, sure, fine then. Just pay Nurse Bendy on the way out.
You don't even care about me.
Well, I care for you. I'm a doctor.
But I thought that you really...
Mrs. Puffington, you'll be fine. I think you're just a little stressed out from the injury.
You can't even bear to look at me.
Excuse me. I need to help my other patients now. Yes? Clay Puppington? Put him on. Yes, Clay, what can I do for you? Orel? Well, who shot him? Oh, I had a few too many highballs, eh? Well, bring him in and I'll discreetly treat the boy. You better go.
So now she lost yet another connection, but she doesn't get to grieve for long, because soon after, Orel and Clay come back from the hunting trip. While she's talking to her son, we get a first-person view of Clay going up the stairs, stopping to listen in, and when Blubberta goes out the room, she breaks down, not realizing he's there. As soon as she does, though, her expression is back to that of the beginning of the episode. No Children plays again, and the two lay in bed, closing on the shot we started on.
I am drowning. There is no sign of land. You are coming down with me, hand in unlovable hand, and I hope you die. I hope we both die.
Blubberta is an extremely interesting character, and she's relatable for a lot of women. Even if your experience isn't the same as hers, being seen as an extension of the man around us is something we unfortunately can't escape most of the time. We always come second in the minds of men, even if it's subconscious, both in media and in reality. The semi-affair with the doctor is just an exaggerated way of saying that she's willing to do anything to win someone's love. She desperately wants to be useful to someone, even if she has virtually no interest in them. She barely has interest for anyone, for that matter. Not her husband, not her kids, not even the doctor. What made her want to please him so much was just the idea of him giving her some sort of recognition, which of course never happened in the end. Blubberta is a clever subversion of the housewife trope. She leans into her role as nothing more than support for her husband and kids because she knows it's the only way to survive in Moralton, which is really tragic. I'm really sad we didn't get to see the end of her arc, but we will dive into it more in the episode Help. But hey, you know what's another way to survive in Moralton? Well, it's being a dedicated member of the church, which, as everybody knows, gives you soul insurance, or at least Clay does, as a way of mentally torturing his son in the episode Grounded.
I guess you're really learning something this time.
The boy makes a little bit of a bloody mess in the bathtub.
What kind of an example is that for your son?
Don't worry about Orel, he's fine. Ship off the old block. My own flesh and blood.
Oh, hi, Dad.
And Clay decides to punish him in a special way, by grounding him from church. Not only is this particularly cruel, as church is Orel's only source of comfort, but he also just rubs salt in the wound by pretending to be affectionate and loving with Blubberta as they leave for church every Sunday, which is really sad considering they are only acting this way out of pure desire to put Orel through extreme psychological distress, just in order for him to learn a lesson. Orel starts to go through an actual crisis, and in the effort to put a cross on his self-made church, he gets electrocuted and then revived in the hospital. After seeing the afterlife, though, Orel craves more, so he keeps dying in order to witness a weirder yet more defined vision each time. But what Orel sees couldn't be farther from the heaven he used to believe in.
You think God can't see into the future?
Is this even on? Oh, yep, it's ready.
His revelation, mixed with the hospital bills, enrages Clay and it beats him as usual. But this time, Orel isn't scared of the consequences. He's just confused and saddened. It's also the first time we actually see him getting spanked by his father, and it's so uncomfortable to just sit there knowing that it happens to Orel in basically every episode. Corporal punishment in families is normalized in society, but I think showing it on screen, which is something we don't see much, is very emotionally impactful. In the end, we learn that this punishment is what led to nature, which really feels like Orel's getting victimized twice in this situation.
I hope that teaches you a lesson, young man.
It sure does, Dad. I'm never gonna do that with those in there for that long ever again.
As I mentioned before, though, Orel was grounded for bathing in blood in the upstairs bathroom, which leads to the natural question, what the fuck happened? Well, we get to learn that here. In a season 2 episode, Orel plays Judas in the school pageant, and he sings this absolute banger called I Hate You, Jesus, which, surprisingly, the town loves. This turns into a big problem though, as Reverend Putty finally realizes that the track might not be very Christian, and the town starts to connect the dots. Orel has been destroying literally everything on his way, in one way or another, through their guidance. For this reason, they choose not to give him advice anymore, in order to not damn the town. Nobody's willing to talk to him, except for Danielle, who cares far too little about the town, or for that matter, to actually refrain from talking to him. And it gives him some interesting insight about innocence.
Well, I found out from Reverend Putty that all kids are innocent, and then Miss Goldblum told me that they can go out and win wars and kill because of it.
Go on.
And then Mr. Christine said that you could be extra innocent in the eyes of God if you slather the blood of the innocent on your front stoop.
Well, that seems like a waste of virgin blood.
What do you mean?
Well, if you bathe in virgin blood instead of painting your house with it, you stay young.
You do?
Of course. You need to read more gothic erotica.
Okay. But, so that means that if I bathe in virgin blood, I could stay a child and then I'll be, sin forever.
Right. Okay, that's it. I'm done talking.
Wow. Now all I have to do is find myself some virgin kids. Thanks for the guidance, Coach.
My pleasure, kid.
I'm gonna be outright honest. I'm happy this episode kind of followed the legacy of season 2 in being mostly humorous. Orel and his friends bathing in virgin blood, the drawback to the I Hate You Jesus song, and the town meeting in the church never failed to get a chuckle out of me, even though the episode that will come after this leaves no space for laughter. Not at all. Alone is the episode infamous for getting the show cancelled, and very unfairly so. It tells the story of Nurse Bendy, Miss Gotham the teacher, and Miss Sensible the librarian. 3 minor characters all living in the alone-for apartments for spinsters, as none of them are married. Something I haven't heard anyone mention before, but right next to them sit the bachelor apartments, which look much more luxurious and are a direct critique of how differently unmarried women get treated compared to men. Nurse Bendy has always just been portrayed as dumb blonde, being constantly objectified and undermined by virtually all the men in town, especially Principal Fakey, as he's established to cheat on his wife with her in the episode Maturity and Repression.
Well, Nurse Bendy, I have a special little student here. I'd like you to check for lice. Ha ha ha!
She's always been pretty uninvested in their relationship, but now we see how actually traumatizing and damaging it was for her. As soon as she enters her apartment, she turns off Reverend Putty's radio sermon, and her face lights up with joy as she finally enters her safe place. Her house looks like a young girl's. There's toys lying around, and she sleeps in a kid's bed. She has 2 teddy bears, which she considers to be her family, called respectively Hubby and Sonny, and she uses a lot of baby talk. Before she eats dinner with her teddies, though, we get a truly aware moment from her as to why she keeps them around.
We all need people who aren't mean to me, or that don't act like they only care about doing dirty, awful things to you. We need family because they care that I'm a real person who has thoughts of sadness sometimes, along with happy thoughts, or scared or loneliness thoughts. I feel thoughts of emotions, and I need people to know that. So, thank you for keeping this family in good shape.
Here, she feels much more adult, expressing herself clearly and almost correctly about her feelings. But then, the milk on her table spills on the floor, and as she cleans it up, Hubby falls on her back, and she immediately breaks down in this gut-wrenching, excruciatingly painful scene. Nurse Bendy uses age regression as a way to cope with her sexual trauma. She wants to keep the adult, unforgiving world out of her home, and the teddy bear falling on her completely ruined the sense of safety she was longing for. Much like Roberta, the nurse is forced into her assigned role in society. She doesn't get to have emotions, she doesn't get to be a person, she doesn't get respect from the men around her. Nurse Bendy is one of my favorite characters, and I can tell many people share my same sentiment, as she's now become one of the most recognizable faces in the show. But I feel like many times, people forget that in this episode there are two other women whose stories are worth talking about. Miss Colton's part of this episode is actually the one that got the show cancelled. And even though I think it was a disgusting move, as there had never been an adult animated show tackling subjects like these before, I can see why. This episode is particularly distressing to watch in general, but Miss Colton's story is not only hard for me to talk about, in the sense that it revolves around a very serious and delicate topic, but it's also extremely difficult to follow, as I did have a hard time understanding the full extent of what was happening. As soon as she enters her house, it's clear that she suffers from OCD, clicking the lights on and off multiple times, a lock-in and a lock in the door. The way her home was designed makes it extremely suffocating, intentionally. While Nurse Bendy's apartment is her safe place, Miss Colton doesn't feel at peace anywhere. Immediately, we are hit directly in the face with tragedy, as we see a bloody hanger on the table, implying a self-inflicted abortion. As if it wasn't bad enough, the reason she was pregnant at all was because she was raped by the ice cream man Cecil Creepler, who for now has been portrayed jokingly as the stereotypical pedo trying to win Orel's friend Doey's love.
Oh, hey, Doey.
Hi! Kinda late to be selling children's snack treats, don't you think, Mr. Creepler?
But now, he's an actual threat, and his actions are played completely straight. Miss Colton was violated in her own home. She has no safe place. She not only has to deal with what has happened to her, but also with the painfully ignorant society of Moralton, who victim blames her and defends the perpetrator. Miss Colton is conflicted about the attack and deals with an extreme sense of guilt many survivors of SA struggle with, as her body reacted positively to the assault. Which is a thing that does happen, but the lack of medical care and awareness in Moralton obviously doesn't help with her problem. This was the first time she ever did have intercourse with someone, which leaves her feeling even more disgusted in herself. Miss Colton's is a tragic story about a woman who desperately needs support, but the environment she's in will never help her recover from the traumatic experience she went through. She needs access to safe abortion, which is already an extremely difficult and nerve-wracking experience for any woman to go through, as the body will naturally make you attached to the fetus in you no matter how much you don't want it. So imagine having to go through it by yourself and without the medical attention you need. The town also needs therapy, not the church repressional, but these are all changes that would never take place in Moralton. Her story is about the dangers of ignorance around the themes of sexual assault and the consequences that come with it. And after this extremely difficult segment, we need to talk about the last woman in Alone, Miss Censordoll. Frances Clara Censordoll is the town's librarian, even though she mostly just protests everything that she doesn't deem holy enough. She's a control freak, and her house fully reflects that. Everything is perfectly neat and tidy, and oh, I forgot to mention, she has a literal model of the town in her living room. Another thing I forgot to mention by now is that throughout the first 2 seasons, she was established to have an unhealthy obsession with eggs, which finally gets explained in this episode, and oh boy. We come to find out through a call with her mother that when she was a newborn, she had a salpingectomy performed on her in order for her to be holy. She's obsessed with eggs because she doesn't have them, which is truly saddening considering the operation was done without her consent. Despite that, she did take what her mother did to heart, developing a superiority complex and deeming herself pure, thus God's vassal. She aspires to take control of Moralton, which is a plot point that continues throughout the episode Nesting, but was unfortunately left unresolved as the show got cancelled.
alone is a saddening yet realistic piece of commentary on how women get treated in society, especially regarding sexual assault cases. Nurse Bendy, Miss Gotham, and Miss Nursedal are all extremely fragile women who have been victimized in some way by the world around them. And the fact that the show was cancelled over this is such bullshit. It's not the first time they portray these topics. As they said, in the episode Courtship, Cecile Kriepler's sole goal is to convince Joey to get in the back of his ice cream van. The problem here, apparently, is that it wasn't played for laughs, but that just proves how immature as a society we are to not be able to stand a show that isn't scared to talk about SA without putting a joke in the mix. Now, I better just leave the topic here because it truly inflames me and start finally talking a bit about Joey Latchkey in the episode Trigger. Just from his name, we can understand a lot, as a latchkey kid is a term used to describe a young child that has to take care of themselves and carry their own keys as their parents aren't expecting them at home. Joey's parents are the definition of peaked in high school. They're the same age as Stephanie, implying that they were teen parents and truly never grew up after. They still look and wear the same clothes they did when they were young and are still very immature, making them extremely unfit to raise a child. For that reason, Joey never received the love he needed, as his parents just throw money at him to make him go away.
Kitten, are you in? Hey, what's going on in here?
Well, Dad, I got a scrape and Mom was just...
Oh, yeah, sure you got a scrape.
But, Dad...
Listen, bub, stop trying to horn into my action.
But, Dad, I'm not trying to...
I saw her first, fella. Now use the cash I gave you this morning and go buy your own bandages. Go on, beat it.
Yes, sir.
One day, after his mom and dad neglect him once more, he gets out of the house, only for him to stumble upon Clay teaching Orel how to shoot a week before the hunting trip, at which he miserably fails at. But it turns out, on the other hand, Joey is an extremely talented shot, to which he explains that the secret to shooting is just...
I guess you just have to try to pretend that no one cares. Like, nothing you do ever means anything to anybody. You know, like you're totally invisible.
Now, Joey's got the right idea.
Clay's impressed, and threatens Orel to bring Joey on the trip instead of him. Craving Clay's attention and immediately latching onto him as a father figure, Joey tries his best to push Orel over the edge to make him fail at shooting, basically inserting himself in Orel's life. The show does a great job at establishing that even though Joey's intentions are not the best, in the end he's just an extremely neglected kid craving the love of an authority figure. And while we should feel for Orel, as his already weak relationship with Clay is getting further strained by his best friend, we should also feel for Joey. In the end, though, his plan fails as Orel takes his advice to heart, and by not caring about anything anymore, he actually does a great job at shooting, at which Clay tells Joey he had no intention of bringing him on the hunting trip anyway, leaving the kid alone once again.
Oh, Joey, that was just a ploy to get Orel to shoot better. Why, you could be Lee Harvey Oswald, and I still wouldn't bring you on that trip with me.
Joey is an extremely tragic character. He's just a child longing for someone to care about him. And yes, Clay is the last person you want as a father, but of course he can't know that. All he wants is to spend time with someone who actually treats him as a son, and I find that extremely heartbreaking. Another character that is similar to Joey in that sense, and that I yet have to talk about, is Joe, and his family dynamic gets explored in the episode right after Trigger, Dumb. As I said earlier, Joe has always been presented as a troublemaker, and now we finally understand why. His father is old and riddled with dementia, and he's always too tired to do anything with him. The only person who cares for him is his middle-aged stepsister, whom he never listens to as he doesn't respect her enough to actually let her parent him.
Look, Joe, I made your favorite dessert, ice cream candy cookie cake.
You're not my mom.
Joe likes anyone to look after him like an actual authority figure should, just like Joey. But unlike him, Joe takes his frustration out on everything and anyone. One day, he finds out through his uncle Daniel that his mother, who he initially thought was dead, is actually Nurse Bendy, and he comes to visit her at the Alone for apartments. This recontextualizes her longing for a family, as their stuffed bear Sunny is actually a replacement for Joe, who was taken away from her. I'd like to mention that since this episode takes place during nature, after Alone, we can see she tied a hubby to the table in order to avoid another incident, which is really haunting, but at least, in the end, the two reunite, and it's really sweet. As I said before, it's rare to have an actually healthy relationship in this show, so it is really heartwarming to see Nurse Bendy finally get to have a family of her own, and Joe finding comfort in an adult. It's just truly sweet. Help, on the other hand, is probably one of the least comforting episodes in the whole show, as it tells the story of how Clay and Roberta got married.
Are you going to the reception?
Oh, no, I couldn't. I don't know anyone.
I'm Roberta Hymantact.
I'm Clay Puppington.
Clay Puppington. Nice to know you. Now are you going to the reception?
Roberta was always alienated from society, being the forgotten middle child in her family and the only unmarried woman in her group of friends. That is, until she meets Clay at a wedding reception, and he's much different from the guy we know now. He's shy, polite, and most importantly, he doesn't even drink. Roberta does convince him too, though, and immediately we start seeing the same pattern of behaviors we can recognize. I want to give props to the music again, as another Man and Goat song, Old College Dry, plays in this episode. The track comes from the same album as No Children, Tallahassee, and once again, it's about the alpha couple. The song is about how the two could see the warning signs and red flags in one another ever since they first met, but that they only chose to be together, and they always will be. No matter how miserable they are, they'd always give their relationship the old college try. And this, once again, perfectly sums up the episode. Clay, right after drinking, starts to act like a complete jackass, and Roberta shows clear signs of manipulation early on. The only reason they got together in the first place was to fulfill each other's needs. Roberta wanted to be useful to a man and find her purpose in life, while Clay was just a fragile person with abandonment issues who wanted someone to look after him like a mother would. And that's exactly what happened, and they got tired of it very, very early on.
Help.
Roberta.
Yes, Clay?
You help hold my head up so it doesn't fall and hurt like no one has in a long, long time. So, I should keep you.
They were already miserable by the time they were engaged, and it's also established that after Clay started drinking, he never stopped, morphing into the man we know today. Help is a cautionary tale about being forced into marriage at a young age. When you're in your 20s, you can't possibly realize how permanent the concept of marriage is. The whole idea of a high-value man doesn't want a 30-year-old bride is not only bullshit, looking at you just pearly things, but actively damaging. Many young people rush into destructive or abusive relationships because they're pressured into them, and getting out is extremely difficult. That's the reality for many young people in religious settings. While this episode is about Clay and Roberta's relationship, it's been from her point of view. Now, it's time to delve deeper into Clay's psyche, and to do that, we need to take a look at Passing. This is the episode that revolves around the childhood of the most cold, frustrated man in Morrilton, as we learn what led him on this path of self-destruction. Clay's parents raised him in two completely different ways, which led them to become distant and cold to one another. While his mother, Angela, was very protective of him, spoiling him and enabling the early signs of narcissism he showed, his father, Arthur, wanted to raise him as more of a stereotypical manly man. This would mark Clay down the line, as his self-hatred stems from the fact that he doesn't feel like he's enough of a man. He feels weak and belittled by women around him, but at the same time, his mother's love and protection is his only source of comfort, both as a child and as an adult. One day, though, Clay finds out he isn't an only child, as his mother had not 1, not 2, and not 3, but 10 miscarriages due to drinking and chain-smoking, which is why she spoils him so much. The kid, with this information, decides to fake his own death with old Gunny, the one passed down from generations by the Puppingtons, in order to win his mother's full attention again. This doesn't go as planned, as his mother literally has a heart attack and dies due to the shock of seeing her 12-year-old son pass. His father isn't very happy. He's about to hit Clay, but then he speaks this extremely important line.
You're not even worth it.
The child took this to heart, acting out so that his father will physically abuse him, as he grows to see it as a form of affection. Arthur, in the end, decides to end the hunting trip Puppington tradition, which is why Clay took old Gunny away from Orel in the first place. He didn't want to bond with his son, he just wanted what he never experienced. This episode genuinely had me in tears, just like Help. Clay is a deeply complex character. He has trauma, and he has had a very shit childhood, but the show never tries to justify his actions towards his own son. Just because to him, both receiving and inflicting physical abuse is a form of affection, doesn't mean him beating Orel in virtually every episode is suddenly okay. Just because he was manipulated into drinking by Blaberta doesn't mean it's her fault he's a violent alcoholic. And just because he was dealt a bad hand in life doesn't mean he gets to ruin the lives of others. Clay is a bad person who also needs help and support, and these two things can coexist in one character. I'm sorry, but I just have to mention the song choice again in this episode too. Love, 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 again, by the Mountain Goats, isn't in Tallahassee, and it isn't about the alpha couple. It's in my personal favorite album of the band, The Sunset Tree, and it's all about the real-life experience of John Darnielle of being abused by his stepfather throughout his childhood and teenage years. It's an album for victims of all kind of exploitation and violence to relate to, and Love, Love, Love specifically is about how love is not always a positive force. It's not always used for good deeds. Sometimes love will lead you to do horrible things. Love can be unhealthy, obsessive, and violent. Love is not always a source of comfort. It can shake you up, and that reflects the dynamic of Clay's family. Each of the members loved each other, yet none of them had a healthy way of expressing that. Angela loved through enabling and overprotectiveness. Arthur, before Angela's death, loved in a tougher way, as we can also see in the Before Orel special, and Clay saw love as a form of ownership. Again, amazing choices of music. Speaking of music and love, Close Face is an episode just about that.
Okay, kiss me. Now!
Hey, whoa! What are you trying to do to me here?
It's our favorite time of the year, the arm's length dance, and Orel desperately wants to go with Christina, but her father Art is not too happy about seeing him. So he goes to Stephanie for advice, who reminisces about her own time at the dance. It turns out that when she was in high school, she was in a relationship with Kim, Doey's mom. Or at least she saw it as a relationship, while actually on Kim's part, it was just a way to prank Reverend Petty. Stephanie was really invested in her bond, and even wrote a song about her called Close Face, referring to the blurry and distorted image of Kim's face when they kissed. So after she realized her girlfriend wasn't actually her partner at all, she got her heart broken. For that reason, she wants to help Orel by having he and Christina go to the dance together, which she succeeds in doing. She also has a very heartwarming moment with her dad, as he states that he didn't approve of Stephanie's relationship because it was gay, but because he could tell Kim didn't care about her, which once again lets us see the more understanding and sweet side he has to him.
You can't compare you and her to Orel and his little Orelette.
Why? Because we're two girls and tolerance is only a pretend theme?
No, because she never cared about you.
Oh, wow. You remember things better than I do.
Yeah, I remember. When you have my track record with love, that kind of stuff hits you like a ton of bricks. I felt bad for you. But if you start playing that song of yours again, we might both get lucky tonight. Hit it, kid.
Stephanie is a true gem in Moralton. Despite everyone looking down upon her, all of the characters that interact with her, aside from the Latchkeys, end up developing for the better. She's great representation for alternative people in conservative environments, and I don't have much other to say about this episode aside from the fact that it's extremely wholesome and endearing, and that both Stephanie and the Reverend are a pleasure to see on screen. Sundays, on the other hand, is kind of a weird episode. Don't get me wrong, it's one of my all-time favorites actually, but it's weird in the sense that it revolves around two characters we've basically never seen on screen, Florence and Dottie, who, after leaving their respective husbands, go live together in the Alone-for apartments. Florence has a massive crush on Reverend Patty, but as she's overweight, he finds her undesirable, thus is cold and honestly kind of a dick to her, while he is interested in Dottie, as she's an extremely beautiful woman. And she knows it, never missing the opportunity to tear her friend down in order to garner the Reverend's attention, despite not having any interest towards him.
Are you mad at me?
No. Why?
Nothing. You know the Reverend's comment.
I don't remember a comment.
That he's more attracted to me than you.
Dottie, he never...
During the sermon, he called me pretty.
When? He didn't even look at you.
He didn't have to. He mentioned fat, and then he mentioned pretty. It was obvious what two people he was talking about. I'm not fat, you are.
In the end, Florence and Patty do end up sleeping together, but it gets very sad very quickly as the Reverend shouts Dottie's name during intercourse. She's initially pleased about it, but after hearing Florence crying, she's overwhelmed with guilt. The episode ends on an even darker note, as during a sermon about hope, Reverend Patty looks around searching for Orel, the one person who is always gonna have a smile on his face, but this segment takes place after nature. Florence and Dottie are criminally underrated characters. Even with their very limited screen time, we get scenes that tell us a lot about their personalities and stories and why they act the way they do. We can see that Dottie is bulimic, which explains, not justifies, her perceived competition looks-wise against Florence and her deep desire for male validation. We can see that Florence is a caring mother, possibly one of the few decent parents in the whole show, and that she has a deep desire for connection and expressing her sexuality, but her body doesn't allow her to by societal standards. If the season wasn't cut short, she would have ended up with Reverend Patty, and would have also lost weight due to not binging anymore after her experience with him. I find it interesting as it's not represented as a positive thing, like a before and after. It's just a part of her life now, and she never actually expresses her feelings about her slim body. I wish we got more screen time with them. Sundays is definitely the most underrated episode of Moral Orel, but I'm not complaining because now we need to talk about my favorite episode in the whole series, Sacrifice. The episode takes place on Easter, after Reverend Patty's sermon on hope. We come to find Clay skipped church to go to the bar, and it's an entirely character-driven installment. It's solely about the interactions between the four most influential men in town: Clay, Reverend Patty, Officer Papermouth, ex-husband of Florence, and Dr. Potterswheel, as they're all sitting at the bar. It starts off with Clay complaining, as usual, about sacrificing his happiness and enduring the pain of living a life he doesn't want for his family. But then the conversation shifts towards marriage.
And then when you finally get one of these coveted pieces of tail that have been built up as the grand trophy in your nothing life, you try desperately to keep it. Not to protect it, but to hoard it. To keep it away from the other wolves and jackals circling your territory. And you realize, all too soon, that you're not good enough. That maybe there was a jerk-off called Darwin after all. And that you never acknowledged his existence because you knew deep inside that you were really what you feared you were. Weak and passive and ultimately broken by the ones who were made the fittest.
It's extremely important to mention that Clay is the only man in the room that is currently in a relationship, as Reverend Patty only had that one-night stand with Florence, Officer Papermouth is divorced, and Dr. Potterswheel is a widower. And by that, I mean he's implied to have murdered his own wife by giving her painkillers instead of curing her injuries for the sake of his mutilation fetish.
Dr. Quentin Xavier Potterswheel.
Clay?
Hey, Doc, we were just talking about ex-wives.
I'm a widower.
Oh, right. Must be nice to lose a wife to sickness and death instead of her just plain old getting sick of you.
No, not so nice, especially when you're a doctor.
She just loved those painkillers. Probably didn't even realize she was infected, right, Doc?
She was quite comfortable when she passed.
Numb, some call it. Now, me and Jesus, we like to feel the pain.
It's in this episode where we get to realize the full extent of Clay's hatred towards everything and everyone. He feels like the world did him wrong, Like women did him wrong. Like the man stronger than him did him wrong, which is partly true and partly just his victim complex. He enjoys flaunting this marriage to these men, but it's only because he knows that they don't have what he does, and he's actually the most miserable out of all of them. In the end, he pushes them over the edge so much that they're about to beat him, but in the end, they just leave. He's not even worth it. I feel like Clay's rant in this episode is the most emotionally impactful scene in the whole show, beating out the rant in nature. And that's because I feel like here he feels more human. He feels the most human he's ever been. And that's not only thanks to Scott Adsit, I mean, he absolutely kills it, but it's also because here he's being really vulnerable in a way we've almost never seen. There are a lot of parallels between this scenes and the ones in Passing, where he's trying to get a rise out of his father. And that is also a really interesting comparison between adult Clay and child Clay and how they interact with the world. We see that he truly never grew up after what he did after his mother's death. And that is very interesting, especially because it's really subtle, like it's all pretty much implied. And I feel like the show does a great job at it. So yeah, Sacrifice is absolutely stellar. I'd say it's almost a perfect episode, but now comes nesting. Nesting is just weird. I mean, there's not a single episode that I don't like in season 3. I wouldn't say that I didn't enjoy it. I definitely did, and I did find some really interesting things in there. It's just kind of confusing, honestly. If the show continued after its 3rd season, it probably would have made sense in retrospect, but for now it's just kind of weird. We find out that Clay's stinking dad and job, the one he loathed so much throughout the series, the one he describes as so lambing, is literally being the mayor of Morrilton.
Mr. Mayor, I'm here to suggest...
Orel?
Dad!
What are you doing here?
You're the mayor?
Don't remind me.
Orel is trying to outlaw eggs under Miss Anserdal's guidance, which he does manage to do. The woman's goal is to rule the town as matriarch, and in order to do so, pits Clay and Orel against one another, using what happened in nature as a means to manipulate them both. She exploits Clay Oedipus complex and lack of a stable motherly figure, and she actually seduces him, and this really...
I can't do anything. Wrong. You can do everything. As long as Mommy says you can. Mommy? Yes. Mommy. Mommy.
And that ends nesting. Aside from Clay being the most vicious he's ever been to Orel, saying he's glad he shot him because he doesn't serve his purpose anymore, we get one more look into his psyche, and it's not pleasant. He can't distinguish motherly love from sexual attraction. We see in Bilberta, we even see it in Coach Stopframe to an extent, and now it's the same with Miss Sensordal. So I guess that's the end of nesting, and now comes the end of the whole show. This is it.
It's not your time, my Valentine. It's not your time, my Valentine.
I cried. I cried a lot when I realized this was actually the last episode of the main series. It's been such a ride of laughter, pain, complexity, and love, and now it's time to end on honor. Turns out, Danielle actually witnessed Clay and Miss Anserdal kissing, and he's not too pleased about it. In the meantime, Orel is trying to find a reason to honor his father, so he goes to his coach. Things don't go as expected though, as Danielle too lost all his respect for Clay. The two spend Christmas time together, and it's honestly really sweet to see this man who for the past 3 seasons has been dull and cold to everyone but Clay finally act like a good person. It goes to show that without his influence, he really can thrive. In the end though,
The rest of the Puppingtons go to stop from his house, where all hell breaks loose as Clay desperately tries to convince Danielle to get back with him.
Stay away from him! He's not yours, I am! I mean, he's mine, my son! Oh, I miss you, Orel. I need you in my life, Orel. And I love you.
We should go.
I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. Orel?
Come on, Dad. It's late.
No!
He's right. It's too late.
But Danielle can't stand to be with Clay anymore. It's too late. So the Puppingtons go home, with every mountain being completely destroyed, and we get to see a flash forward, in which Orel is shown to grow up into a good man, finally be able to be with Christina and spend the rest of his life as a present father. We see he never give up on his faith, and he still keeps a picture of Clay and Roberta, who are probably still together and miserable. At least Orel got the amazing life he deserved, despite having his childhood ripped away by the cruel adults around him. He truly broke the cycle.
You're not gonna get any answers out of me. I'm just a puppet for the big guy. I don't write this stuff. The end. Amen. Nah, who am I kidding? The end.
Moral Orel has been such a ride. This video has been such a ride. It pains me so much to think that it has all ended so early. I don't think I'm ever gonna forget it. The show is not just dark and sad, it's also filled with love and hope and emotion, and I'm so happy I discovered it because I feel like it has truly saved me in some capacity. It is such a hidden gem, and I'm so grateful that other creators have been talking about it, probably better than I did, and that so many people are now getting into the show. It truly deserves to be out there with Rick and Morty in Adult Swim's history. I hope I was able to get my admiration for the show out there. I'm so grateful I got to talk about it, and I'm so happy. But, you know, it's also kind of bittersweet, because I'm always reminded that we could have had more. We could have had much more if just this show was allowed to fucking breathe. But, you know, in the end, I'm still content with what we got, and I'm very grateful that this show exists at all. And if this went well, then I'll hopefully see you next time. I had a lot of fun making this.